From Fox 5 News, a special presentation from the Fox 5 Storm Team. Eye on the tropics.
Hurricane season is here, and even though North Georgia sits hundreds of miles from the coast, we could still feel the impact of the storms. The Fox 5 Storm Team is keeping an eye on the tropics. We have seen destruction, damage, deaths from tropical systems here in Georgia, and will likely see it again. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chief Meteorologist David Chandley.
I'm Jonathan Stacy.
And I'm Joanne Feldman. Our mission as the Fox 5 Storm Team is to prepare you and your family for that one storm that could affect your life and property.
So for the next 30 minutes, we will break down why this may be an active tropical season and to hear from seasoned hurricane experts.
We'll take you to the home base of the Hurricane Hunters, the brave men and women who fly into the eye of the storms, and we'll show you what you need to have to keep your family safe during the storms. But let's start by debunking the notion that hurricanes and tropical storms are only a coastal concern.
Joanne, recent history tells us that North Georgia is in the crosshairs for tornadoes, damaging winds, and flooding.
Yeah, I traveled down to the National Weather Service office in Peachtree City and learned experience can play a major role in that messaging.
Inland impacts are a big deal.
Tornadoes, strong winds bringing down trees and producing power outages, and torrential rain creating flash flooding, all well documented across North Georgia in the past years. Need examples? Check out Hurricane Delta in 2020, Hurricane Cindy, Dennis, and Katrina back in '05. Dave Nadler and the crew at the National Weather Service office in Peachtree City issued the severe weather warnings that we, the Fox 5 Storm Team, relay to you, the viewer. He points out that our area doesn't have to be ground zero for a landfall to see devastating results.
The center of the storm doesn't have to be right on top of you to feel the effects and impacts of tropical systems. We could get, obviously, tornadoes in the outer rain bands. They could be 100, 200 miles away from where the center of the storm is.
That's why we pay so much attention to what's brewing in the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. And Nadler agrees that Gulf storms pose the greatest threat.
With like the tornado threat and the heavy rain threat typically is on the east side of the storm. And that's because the storm is cyclonic, moves counterclockwise. So all that, moisture, energy coming in off the Gulf of Mexico is really going to pile up on the east side of these systems.
Knowing the history and using the latest technology, forecasting the impacts of these tropical systems and giving the viewers ample warning has greatly improved in the last decade.
The models for sure have improved, and if you look at the cone of uncertainty, that probability of where the storm is going to track from the hurricane center, that cone continues to just shrink and shrink, little by little every few years because of the understanding, the research, the higher resolution model data that's out there, satellite data that's improved. So yeah, I think that's come a long way.
When tropical systems move through North Georgia, we experience heavy rainfall that leads to flooding. Storm Team meteorologist Jeff Hill takes a look at the history of tropical activity in our region.
All right, now that hurricane season has officially begun, let's take a look at what we can expect as we go down the road. The peak for hurricane season doesn't occur until September. Until then, though, the activity usually is pretty low, but we still could see some big storms early in the season, so we got to be aware. And as far as what happens here in the southeast, typically farther inland, it's flooding. We do get some wind damage. We have the risk of tornadoes. But look at some of these incredible rain totals across the southeast. Danny, back in 1997, 37.75 inches of rain in Alabama. Here in Georgia, we picked up 27.85 inches of rain. That was from Alberto back in 1994. Most of that was down in the southern part of the state. But we've had some incredible amounts here in North Georgia, especially going back to Opal. We got close to 7 inches of rain here in Atlanta with a lot of flooding. Now, last year was a well above normal season, 21 named storms. And here's a look at some of those that came through Georgia. In fact, we had Tropical Storm Claudette, which was early in the season, came right over Atlanta, June 19th through the 22nd. That had maximum sustained winds at one point of 45 miles per hour. And then we had Hurricane Elsa, which came through the state as a tropical storm all the way down near Savannah and then right out and up toward the Columbia Columbia area, did some damage down there. We also had Tropical Storm Fred, which came right over Atlanta. At one point that had winds of 65 miles an hour when it was down in the Gulf of Mexico, and Tropical Storm Mindy, which was fairly weak, but it went across the southern part of the state with winds of 60 miles an hour. There's a look at the tropical forecast for this season. Both the Colorado State forecast and the official National Hurricane Center forecast are above normal. The average is 14, 7, and 3. 3 major hurricanes, 7 hurricanes, and 14 named storms. So it looks like this year could be very, very active. And one difference that we have this year, we have the primary list of names, and instead of the Greek alphabet being used for the secondary list, if we get past the first list, we've got a second list now for this year.
Some of the worst flooding we've seen in Georgia happened nearly 30 years ago during Tropical Storm Alberto. Let's take a look back at that devastation and talk about why flooding is so dangerous.
Flash flooding from heavy rainfall from tropical systems is a big concern, especially inland. When you look at the deaths associated with tropical systems that make landfall, like a quarter of them are attributed to freshwater flooding due to heavy rain.
Our worst example of this is flooding from Tropical Storm Alberto back in 1994 that claimed 34 lives. Belanger tells me the threat for flash flooding is greater here in metro Atlanta than other parts of the state.
The state is divided up into 2 separate areas. So north of what we call the fall line, where the soils are a lot more clay or rock based, including the metro Atlanta area, your incidence of flash flooding goes up exponentially.
She also says the impervious surfaces of roads, homes, and buildings often escalate the flooding potential, and that flooded roadways produce the greatest risk.
It takes 6 inches of flowing water to knock somebody off their feet, and only 12 inches to move a car. And I think that that's really something that's underestimated by a driver.
They're the men and women who fly into the path of powerful storms. Coming up, we'll take you behind the scenes exclusively with the Hurricane Hunters.
But first, devastating hurricanes have their names retired. The naming process began in 1953, so which letter has had the most retired names? We'll have the answer after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Before we went to break, we asked you which letter has the most retired hurricane names. Well, the answer is the letter I. You may recall storms like Ivan, Ike, Irma, and Ida. There have been 12 named storms with the letter I that have been retired. David?
Yeah, in this year's storm, I is Ian, so we'll see if it gets retired by the devastation it may or may not cause. All right, before hurricanes move in, officials urge people to move out of the storm's path.
But for the brave men and women of the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, evacuation isn't on their radar. This is Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, the home of the Hurricane Hunters. And this is the WC-130J. Beaming under a fresh coat of new paint and the word that defines its purpose, this aircraft's sunny days will soon be few and far in between. But before these hunters fly into a busy season, we were given rare access inside.
We are the only squadron that has airborne reconnaissance weather officers.
Our guide, Air Force Reservist Lieutenant Colonel Mark Withy. For the past 7 years, this 42-year-old father of 2 has been one of the squadron's navigators.
There's a lot that we can see with satellites, but ultimately the information we gather by flying through the storm and sampling it in person is really critical for them to make the most accurate forecasts and get those watches and warnings out to the public.
From the Atlantic to the Pacific, they are the eyes and ears of the National Hurricane Center, flying straight into some of Earth's fiercest storms for up to 12 hours at a time.
How an average person would gauge it, it would be some very extreme turbulence. We're going through the eye wall, and obviously there's a significant amount of bouncing up and down, sometimes hundreds or thousands of feet.
Do you get scared?
I'm a bad person to ask.
No, be honest, just be blunt. Do you get scared?
No, not really.
After all, he's flown into some of the strongest and most destructive storms in modern history.
Every year is different.
But no matter the storm or the season, each flight crew is made up of 2 pilots, a load master, a weather officer, and a navigator. So Mark, this is your office.
This is my office, the Navigator Station on the WC-130. It's one of the changes from the regular C-130J models is we have a navigator station back here, and that's where I'm going to be primarily using radar to pick our way safely through the storm.
He's on the lookout for radar signatures like this. They often indicate the presence of mesocyclones or vertical rotation within a storm. A close pass near these violent winds could put the crew and the aircraft in serious danger.
We're flying through a very extreme environment, so we have to balance accomplishing the mission with safety.
Part of that mission involves flying in what's called an alpha pattern. On this flight path, data is gathered from each quadrant surrounding the center of the storm circulation.
So the drop sondes, they are shot out of a tube here in the bottom of the aircraft. It lifts up, and you place the drop sonde in the tube.
As it falls to the water surface, the drop sonde captures temperatures, dew points, pressure levels, and wind speeds. Those numbers are then relayed back to the loadmaster on board by radio. The plane's exterior instruments are just as important, but not as obvious.
Radar's right here behind this dome, and that's really our picture to the world when we're flying through those intense parts of the storm and can't see anything outside.
And underneath the wing, there's this guy, nicknamed the Smurf.
SFMR, a stepped frequency microwave radiometer. It's a passive sensor that's looking at the sea surface, and from that it can determine the rain rate and the wind speed on the surface.
And more, or should I say faster, technology is on the way.
One of the things that we have been working on in the past few years is getting a broadband internet connection.
While the technology in the air and on the seas improves with each passing season, robots and machines will never replace the valor and the bravery of these weather warriors.
We're out there responding to something that is ultimately has the potential to cause a lot of impact to people's lives, usually in a negative manner. So there is an element of excitement in what we do, but at the same time, we know that what we're doing is to help folks out, and that's really important to us.
Depending on the proximity of a storm to land, the hurricane hunters can travel through a storm up to 8 times in one day. But this isn't just a seasonal job. They're also busy flying into nor'easters in the winter and into Pacific Ocean storms in the spring. David?
Well, the remnants of major tropical systems can wreak havoc on Georgia. Coming up, Joanne shows us the impact that some of the most recent storms have had on Metro Atlanta.
The last few years have shown just how much impact tropical systems and remnants of them can have on North Georgia. In August of last year, remnants of Tropical Storm Fred crossed North Georgia, spinning up 4 tornadoes in our viewing area alone, including an EF1 in the community of Isla in Madison County, where it twisted trees and scattered anything in its path. That same tornado also tore through Banks County to the north. 2020 was a particularly active year. In September, remnants of Hurricane Sally brought a destructive combination of wind and rain. Trees came down throughout the metro areas, triggering scattered power outages. And just about a month later, in mid-October, remnants of Hurricane Delta soaked parts of the area and forced officials to block off flooded streets. And tornadoes unleashed destruction in several counties. This included an EF1 that damaged the roof of Noonan High School and scattered debris. Fortunately, no one was injured there. But just days later, Tropical Storm Zeta turned deadly as it blasted through at the end of October. Tropical storm force winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour toppled trees, killing 3 people, 1 in Cherokee County and 2 in Gwinnett County. Now, as we guide you through hurricane season, one of the resources we will have here at Fox 5 is the Fox Weather Team. Meteorologist Ryan Beasley caught up with Fox Weather contributor and hurricane specialist Brian Norcross.
Brian, thanks for joining us on this hurricane special. What role will Fox Weather have in covering hurricanes this year?
Well, we're going to be on top of it. We're going to be there all day, all night, as hurricanes are starting to develop or any kind of tropical systems are starting, and through landfall and then beyond. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of resources at Fox to cover the news and, in this case, the weather. So it's going to be it's a full-scale effort, no question about it.
What advice do you have for folks here in Georgia on how they should prepare for hurricane season, even though we're hundreds of miles from the coast?
In Atlanta, hurricanes should be treated more like tornadoes, because if a hurricane, the remnants of a hurricane comes and affects the Atlanta metropolitan area, which they have many times, by the way, you have very strong gusty winds and you have trees down and a lot of power out and that kind of thing, or winter storms, same kind of idea. You might get trapped in your home, you might have a branch down on your house, you might have be stranded somewhere. So that's really the way in Metro Atlanta that you need to be thinking about hurricanes. Now, down on the southeast coast, down in Savannah and Brunswick, we don't have that many hurricanes there, and people tend to think of Matthew or they think of Irma, but those were baby hurricanes compared to the great hurricanes that hit there in the late 19th century, in 1886 and 1893, and the big one, the really granddaddy of them in 1898, that just devastated the entire southeastern part of Georgia. So it can happen. It doesn't happen too terribly often, but folks in that part of the state need to have full-scale hurricane plans, including evacuations and things like that.
Really appreciate your time, Brian Norcross from Fox Weather. And for more information and more to download the Fox 5 Weather app or stream Fox Weather on your favorite connected TV device, make sure you do that as soon as possible. Brian, thank you again for your time.
As we've been saying, we're expecting an above-average hurricane season this year. Meteorologist Jeff Hill explains why.
This year expected to be above normal. Why? Because we have a La Nina situation setting up out in the Pacific, and when that happens, the winds are not as strong, blowing across the Caribbean over into the Atlantic. So we're expecting an above normal season this year. And the formation zones, of course, early in the season, it's always down just to our south in the Gulf of Mexico. So through June, July, we have to watch this area very closely. But once the season really cranks up, we get towards September, which is the most active month. That's when we look out toward the Atlantic with those big storms that come in off of Africa and approach the East Coast.
We're asking you, has North Georgia ever been under a tropical storm warning? We'll be back after the break with the answer. Welcome back. We're asking, has North Georgia ever been under a tropical storm warning? The answer is yes. For Irma, September 10th, 2017, and again for Zeta in October of 2020.
Well, Jonathan, as you know, the key to weathering a storm is hurricane preparedness kit. Meteorologist Joan Feldman has done that for us right here. What do we need?
Right. Well, let's talk about the absolute necessities first, especially if you lose power or even if you have to evacuate. From the power perspective, the obvious. You need batteries to power flashlights, a NOAA weather radio to get life-saving weather information. That's going to be very important.
Yeah, make sure that your devices are charged and you have a charging device to do it when the power goes out, too.
That way you can stream our coverage, too,
exactly.
on our app. There you go. And also, of course, the food and water necessities. You want to be planning for 3 days for each member of your family with food, water, and medicine, not only for you, but for your children. And don't forget your pets. And a 3-day water supply looks like a gallon per person per day. So this is just for one person right here.
So what else are we not thinking of?
Well, obviously you want to think about the non-perishable items and a way to open cans if you have canned food. Don't forget that. But then let's get to the point where what's going to make me comfortable beyond the necessities. If I have to evacuate, I'm going to want to make sure I have toiletries on hand, right?
Very, very important.
Right. Sanitizing wipes, change of clothes, towels, very obvious things.
What's with the board games?
Okay, don't underestimate how useful this is going to be when you don't have power and you need to keep a family entertained. Board games, jigsaw puzzles, and then, in addition to a change of clothes, this is more of a necessity than just something to make you comfortable. Sturdy shoes. If you're in a situation where you have to walk through debris, you don't want to be barefoot or in flip-flops.
All right, so we got all this. What are we going to do with it?
All right, you need to find a container that will protect it from water and something that's just portable. Grab it and go and make sure every member of your family knows where it's located.
And this not only works for hurricane preparedness, but severe storms throughout the year.
Absolutely.
All right, Jonathan?
Good stuff there. Fox 5 Storm Team meteorologist Ryan Beasley sat down with Dr. Trey Alvey with the Hurricane Research Division of NOAA to learn about their unique skills and the added challenges they faced over the past 2 hurricane seasons.
It takes passion and guts to fly into hurricanes. Add unprecedented obstacles to the equation, well, that causes impacts to crew members that even stay behind.
We basically had to do more from the ground than ever before, with less personnel on the plane. But even more so, the past 2 seasons have been some of the busiest ones that we've ever dealt with on record.
Dr. Alvey has a unique responsibility that impacts meteorologists around the world.
And a lot of this data is actually ingested into the forecast models. So a lot of the models that you all show in your forecasts on TV, those actually initially begin with some of the data that we're getting on board these aircraft.
Flying back-to-back missions and always being prepared for the worst is what all of these scientists live for.
Again, our mission here at Fox 5 is to keep you and your loved ones informed and safe during a storm.
As hurricane season gets underway, you can rely on the Fox 5 Storm Team to be here for you.
Make sure you have our Fox 5 Storm Team app. It is a valuable resource in the palm of your hand.
We thank you for joining the Fox 5 Storm Team for this special report, Eye on the Tropics.